Oops.
So, I think we can now begin the meeting. Professor Saeko Yoshikawa Sensei, she's joining us from Kobe City University of Foreign Studies. Thank you very much. She said she had a great time, her first time on the Yakumo Express, coming from Okayama to here. It was very modern and very nice. And she had a wonderful, almost Wordsworthian romantic experience in Izumo on the Nihonkai or Japan Sea yesterday, as if standing before this pagan shrine, and she could imagine Proteus rising from the sea like a pagan suckled in an outworn creed kind of thing. Yoshikawa Sensei has written a very well-received book. Was it with Palgrave or in
No, Ashgate.
Ashgate, yeah, on Wordsworth and the invention of tourism, you know, in the modern age. It used to be in the past, people just didn't really like to leave the town or city and go into the countryside because, well, there are bears and wolves and it's cold. But people like, you know, William Gilpin, then people like Wordsworth and so on, actually got the new people in the industrial age to realize leaving your regular place and going into the mountains and breathing that air and seeing the birds and the trees and feeling some connection has a value. Obviously, we didn't really need that connection when we weren't in the modern age. We were already more connected. But as we get more, in a sense, disconnected, that connection becomes increasingly valuable. And it's that topic which led to her continuing work on William Wordsworth. And for Oxford University Press, Saeko Yoshikawa has actually published an excellent new edition of Wordsworth's famous Guide to the Lakes. Do you have any copies for sale here?
No, thank you. No.
But yes, and that's been very well received, and it was certainly very timely and importantly needed. So thank you very much. And you're going to talk to us about the ecological relationship between men and nature, fitting with our living ideas theme of sustainable development. Trees in Wordsworth's Lake District. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, too. Speaking first.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. So it's the very first time for me to visit Matsue, so, and also Izumo. So it's a great chance for me to explore around here. So let's start.
Oh, handouts. We all have handouts. I don't have.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes.
So I thought a few of you are familiar with Wordsworth. Just before beginning my talk, I will give a little introduction. So William Wordsworth is a British romantic poet who spent most of his 80 years of life in the English Lake District. He was born in 1770 in Cockermouth, in the northwest part of the district. Went to the grammar school in Hawkshead in the southern part of this district. And then from 1799, when he was 29 years old, until his death in 1850 at the age of 80, he lived in the middle of the Lake District in Grasmere and Rydal. In addition to numerous poems, many of which are about his native country, he wrote a guidebook to this area. Wordsworth's Guide to the Lakes was the best-selling work in his lifetime and widely read in the Victorian era. There is an amusing episode that in his later years, he was asked by one of his admirers if he had ever written anything besides a guide. So, among many tourists coming to the Lake District, he was known more as a guidebook writer than as a poet. Wordsworth worked on writing and revising this guidebook for more than a quarter of a century until 1835, when the fifth and final authorized edition was published. Through the repeated revisions, his guide gradually changed its nature, but its core remained the same, essentially the same, where he reflects on nature and human life in the Lake District. For almost 200 years, Wordsworth's Guide has been influential in shaping tourism in the English Lake District and modern attitudes towards natural landscape. So this is the latest edition. This is the latest edition of Guide to the Lakes. This is not a mere tourist guide in any routine sense. The practical information for tourists is very limited, and more pages are given to careful observation of various natural phenomena and philosophical reflections on how we should relate to landscape and natural phenomena. And Wordsworth's interest in this book range from aesthetics and poetry to local history, social system, vernacular architecture and landscaping, forestry and dendrology, meteorology and phenology, geography, geology, and geomorphology, leading to his idea of the harmonious relationship between man and nature. So among these diverse topics that dealt with in this guide, today I will focus on Wordsworth's ecological ideas with particular attention to his views of trees and woods. The term ecology, of course, did not exist in the days of Wordsworth, but there was a similar concept, the economy of nature, which can be traced in his writings. So before going to today's main topic, I'd like to give a glimpse of some of the passages where this idea is suggested. The first example is where Wordsworth explains the rows of mountain tarns or small pools found upon elevated places. So here, the extra one. This is a rather complicated paragraph, but what he says can be summarized as follows. In the economy of nature, the mountain tarns are used as auxiliary to the lakes. For in storms, they serve as temporary receptacles of the rainfall, preventing inundation in the lower places by a gradual distribution of waters. They also serve to keep for a while the vigor of many streams without a fresh fall of rain, he observes. That is to say, mountain tarns adjust the volume, force, and course of the rivers that run through the Lakeland landscape, both in rainy and sunny weather. As he says, these tarns are often surrounded by an unsightly tract of boggy ground. They are insignificant from the aesthetic viewpoint and profitless in view of utilitarianism. But Wordsworth pays attention to such seemingly useless, trivial things and emphasizes their importance in the economy of nature. So as the tarns are important in the network of water across the land, so are the rain, vapors, and clouds that move through the air. Wordsworth is interested in various meteorological phenomena in the Lake District. While admitting the very wet climate of Lakeland, he claims that, as in extract 2, the rain here comes down hardly and is frequently succeeded by clear, bright weather, when every brook is vocal and every torrent sonorous. The poet's ear sensitively captures changes in the sound of the water after rain, and in the fine weather, he observes how vapor rise, warmed by the sun from the lakes and the ground. Extract 3. Vapors exchanging from the lakes and meadows after the sun and hot season, when moist weather, brooding upon the heights or descending toward the valleys with inaudible motion, give a visionary character to everything around them. Akin to these, the fleecy clouds resting upon the hilltops. How glorious are they in nature, how pregnant with imagination for the poet. And the height of the Cumbrian mountains is sufficient to exhibit daily and hourly instances of those mysterious attachments. Here, Wordsworth describes how water changes its form, affected by the sun, and moves along the contours of the land. By those mysterious attachments, he means the inseparable ties between high mountains and clouds. So he is interested in the close relations between the weather and topography, which are, as we will see later, also affecting the vegetation and land use. Also noticeable is the totality of Wordsworth's vision. He describes all the forms of water in turn: rain, brooks, and torrents, vapors coming up from the lakes, mists moving silently along the valleys, and clouds hanging upon the mountains, which will eventually fall again as rain. In this way, Wordsworth makes us feel the cycle of waters that circulates through the land and the sky. And of course, this water cycle is indispensable in supporting the ecosystem in the Lake District, including the life of trees. Okay. So large plantations. And now let's move to today's main topic, Wordsworth's belief in the ecological or symbiotic relationship between man and nature, expressed in his arboreal writings in prose and verse. I will start with large plantations. The most famous or notorious arboreal writings in the Guide to the Lakes, which is Wordsworth's negative comments on large plantations. While he loved all kinds of trees, he didn't like the large tree. His negation is relentless, as in extract 4. In spring, he says, the largest fresh rain is too peculiar and vivid to be harmonized with other trees. In summer, it is of a dingy, lifeless hue. In autumn, of a spiritless and varied yellow. And in winter, the larch appears absolutely dead. Although based on faithful observations, these comments may sound rather biased, which is because Wordsworth's attack was rather targeted at the large-scale forestry campaigns by the landowners who would plant for profits. As in extract 5, he criticized that they would turn the region into a vegetable manufactory where every other tree would be excluded to make room for the larch. Wordsworth, who valued variety and diversity in nature, dislikes the monotony and uniformity of artificial plantations, both in terms of beauty and ecodiversity. And then extract 6, in his opinion, even if we disfigure the appearance of nature by cutting down trees, nature has the power of recovery, whereas the harsh additions like monotonous plantations give more serious damage to nature. In extract 7, he says that in the artificial forest of larches, no other trees or shrubs can be mingled, as the horizontal branches of the large, intolerably cut them down as with size. Accordingly, ecodiversity will be much undermined. Wordsworth is wary of the encroachment of human economic principles on the economy of nature. So in this way, Wordsworth criticizes large-scale plantations and advises the landowners to pay due respect to the surrounding natural woods when planting trees and on their properties. On the other hand, he also advises tourists how to look at trees and how to interpret Lakeland's arboreal landscapes. Now I will discuss how Wordsworth's guide encourages tourists to appreciate the beauty and importance of ecosystems in the Lake District through careful observation of trees. In Guide to the Lakes, Wordsworth repeatedly describes the variegated beauty of the Lakeland trees, the most striking of which is their winter column in this extract 8. The oak coppice upon the sides of the mountains retain russet leaves. The birch stands conspicuous with its silver stem and purse-colored twigs. The hollies with green leaves and scarlet berries have come forth to view from among the deciduous trees, whose summer foliage has concealed them. The ivy is now plentifully apparent upon the stems and boughs of the trees, and upon the steep of rocks. Here, various colors of darker and brighter tones contrast with one another, making one tapestry-like picture. Attention is also paid to different types of shape of trees, coppice woods, single tree, Evergreens revealed among bare trees, and ivy climbing up along trees and rocks. In this way, throughout the guide, Wordsworth captures the changing colors of trees in different seasons, like a painter, emphasizing the beauties of variety. Then he explains how this variety has been produced. Comparing the Cumbrian and Alpine scenery, he claims that the deciduous woods are better in Cumbria, in their variety and beauty. He praises a rich and harmonious distribution of oak, ash, elm, birch, and alder there, and dismisses the well-cultivated rich fields of olive trees and vineyards in the south of Europe for their formality and uniformity. In extract 9, he argues that the sunny weather of southern Europe is not so envious as might seem, for its insights to the cultivation of spots of ground, which in colder climates would be left in the hands of nature. The milder and more fertile land produces vast cultivated fields, which is, in his opinion, gratifying to the palate, but dull to the eye. On the other hand, the English Lake District's cold and wet climate has allowed the region to escape the uniformity of land use, creating a landscape rich in natural variety and wild races. As in extract 10, he praises its exquisite mixture of pasture of lawn, covers of hawthorn, of wild rose and honeysuckle, and the majesty of forest trees. In claiming the visual superiority of English Lakeland to the Alpine countries, Wordsworth suggests that the landscape is created through the human use of land, following the climate and soil of each locality. In any region, the landscape is the product of negotiation between nature and humanity, although to Wordsworth it is better if more space is left for nature. In Lake District, he explains. Number 11. The plow of the first settlers, having followed naturally the veins of richer, drier, or less stony soil, and thus it has shaped out an intermixture of wood and lawn with the grace and wildness which it would have been impossible for the hand of studied art to produce. Here is an implicit comparison with the well-cultivated large-scale vineyards and olive groves in southern Europe. As in the case of opposing industrial large plantations, Wordsworth dismisses monotony of capitalist agriculture. He is more attracted to the kind of landscape where wild elements intervene with human activities. In terms of the sylvan appearance of the Lake District too, the reciprocal relationship between man and nature has produced a pleasing blending of wild forests with planted trees and coppicewood. Wordsworth reminds us how trees have been planted and maintained for the sustenance of the flocks in winter. Particularly, it is the practice of enclosure that he thinks is the key to the unique character of Lakeland trees. On mountain slopes, for instance, dry stone walls, this is the image of some of the images of the dry stone walls in the Lake District. The dry stone walls follow irregular lines as a result of frequent interactions by native woods and rocks, which in his view make a singular beauty. In the lower, less dry grounds, fences are made of alders, willows, and other trees, which, he observed, enriches the valleys with sylvan appearances. So number 12, the intricate intermixture of property has given to the fences a graceful irregularity, which, where large properties are prevalent and large capitals employed in agriculture, is unknown. This sylvan appearance is heightened by the number of ash trees planted in rows along the quick fences and along the walls for the purpose of browsing the cattle at the approach of winter. That is to say, hedges that people planted to enclose their land long ago have since grown over time, creating gracefully irregular sylvan landscapes typical of the Lake District. Coppicing, another example of such a symbiosis between nature and man. According to the National Trust website, number 13, coppicing is a traditional woodland management technique that dates back to the Stone Age. It involves felling trees at their base to create a stool where new shoots will grow. Coppicing was originally used to ensure a regular source of firewood and timber and charcoal for forges and furnaces. These days, coppicing is primarily a way of improving the health and biodiversity of the woodland area by opening it up to the sunlight and allowing a wider range of plants to flourish. In extract 14, Wordsworth explains how in furnace in the southern part of the Lake District, the re-establishment of furnaces upon a large scale created and preserved close woods where pastured wood, pasturage, meadow, and arable land with its various produce intricately intermingled in the same field. The coppice wood near Dudon Furnace is still called harness wood. This is another example of how human activities have helped to preserve silver landscapes. In this way, Wordsworth encourages tourists to appreciate the irregular and variegated beauties of silver landscapes in Lakeland, as they are symbols of pleasing interactions between human activities and the workings of nature. Wordsworth turned our attention to individual trees too. He itemizes numerous trees and shrubs in the lakes, including oak, ash, elm, birch, alders, willows, junipers, hollies, white and black thorn, elder, hazel, honeysuckle, and ivy. Particularly, he loves sycamore and fir tree, as they are part of the cottager's way of life. Number 15. The sycamore has long been the favorite of the cottagers, and with the fir has been chosen to screen their dwellings, and is sometimes found in the fields whither the winds or water may have carried its seeds. It is notable how self-raised trees are mentioned in the same breath as those planted by the cottagers, suggesting the harmony between human activities and the process of nature. The sycamore and fir tree beside the cottage are integrated into the life of the residents, both for their practical roles and aesthetic effects. They shelter cottages from all kinds of weather, whereas a tall fir, Wordsworth tells us, consoles the cottagers with the wind's music, while other trees are leafless in winter. In book 7 of the excursion, Wordsworth's long narrative poem set in the Lake District, his attachment to these trees is fondly expressed as in quotation 16. Young houseboat fir, a guardian planted to fence off the blast, but towering high the roof above, as if its humble destination were forgot. The sycamore, which annually holds within its shade, as in a stately tent on all sides open to the fanning breeze, a grave assemblage, seated while they shear the fleece encumbered flock. As guardians, these trees provide cool shade and breeze in summer, while the villagers shear their sheep in the winter. The same trees shield their homes from the cold, fierce winds. Trees are both sensitive to and firm against the wind, protecting cottagers in all seasons. The congenial relationship between cottages and trees is encapsulated in the more striking image in section 3 of the guide, which contemplates how we should live in harmony with nature. In extract 17, in advising what and how to plant trees in gardens, Wordsworth recommends firs and sycamore to those who are disinterested enough to plant for posterity. Quote, for from their massiveness, both trees unite well with buildings. Both these trees unite well with buildings, and in some situations with rocks also. having in their forms apparent substances the effect of something intermediate betwixt the immovableness and solidity of stone and the spray and foliage of the lighter trees. Intriguingly, as they grow, the sycamore and fir tree come to resemble stones and rocks in terms of solidity and immovability, while retaining the airiness of the twigs and leaves. In their rootedness, the full-grown fir and sycamore recall the steadiness of inorganic stone, while also retaining the suppleness of organic growth. This intermediate quality of big trees is a reminder of Wordsworth's idea of Lakeland cottage, famously described as follows, number 18. These humble dwellings remind the contemplative spectator of a production of nature and may, using a stronger expression, rather be said to have grown than to have been erected, to have risen by an instinct of their own out of the native rock. So little is there in them for formality, such is their wildness and beauty. Here, stone buildings are likened to trees. If trees firmly rooted in the earth acquire the immobility and solidity of rock, stone cottages evoke the organic growth of trees risen out of the native rock. Hence, natural trees unite well with man-made buildings. A similar idea is evoked in the following lines from number 19. The abode to our side would seem in no distinction to surpass the rudest habitation. It might seem that it had sprung self-raised from earth or grown out of the living rock to be adorned by nature only. Over time, a stone cottage gradually resembles a tree, while a tree rooted in the living rock has some of the fixity of the cottage habitation. We may see here the interchangeability between trees and stone buildings. Cottages and their surrounding trees have grown to resemble each other through years of companionship. The symbiosis between man and nature is therefore expressed at the macro level in a sylvan landscape rich in diversity and irregularity. And at the micro level, it is symbolized in the proximity between trees and stone buildings. In passing, in the Guide to the Lakes, Wordsworth repeatedly mentions the organic quality of the vernacular stone cottages in the Lake District, as quoted in extract 20. Because they are mostly built of rough and hewn stone and roofed with uneven slates, he explains, both the coverings and sides of houses have furnished places of rest for the seeds of lichens, mosses, ferns, and flowers. Hence, these buildings, clothed in part with a vegetable garb, call to mind the processes of nature, and they appear to be received into the bosom of the living principle of things. Here again, we can see a symbiotic relation between natural processes and human activity. So, what wishes visitors to see Lakeland trees as a symbol of harmony, coexistence, and collaboration between humanity and nature. Not everyone, however, can read such significance into remarkable objects in an ordinary landscape. To provide a focus for appreciating such arboreal values and to protect the Lakeland trees from utilitarianism, it may be advisable to use a more recognizable symbol that can appeal to a wider range of people and gather affectionate feelings for the trees. What is called here is old yew trees. In the Lake District, there are some magnificent yew trees of more than 1,000 years old, which Wordsworth's guide mentions two famous ones on either side of Water, the second largest lake in the district. In the original version of the guide, published in 1810, he gives a detailed account of the famous yews in Borodale, number 21. The yew-tree have been a favorite with the former inhabitants of Borodale. For many fine old yew trees yet remain near the cottages, probably first planted for an ornament. to their gardens, and now preserved as a shelter and for the sake of their venerable appearance. But the noblest yew trees to be found here are a cluster of three with the poles a little detached, which do not stand in connection with any houses. They are in that part of Borodale which is called Seasway, immediately under the entrance into the lead mines. Nothing of the kind can be conceived more solemn and impressive than the small gloomy grove formed by these trees. Along with sycamore and fir trees, yews were popular with cottages for their noble appearance and their sheltering role. Like other trees, they are an integral part of human life. Those that most fascinated Wordsworth, the cluster of yews standing by the river Darwin, have seemingly nothing to do with houses, although in the poem Yew-trees, he muses on a long history deeply intertwined with human activities and fantasies. So the poem is extracted in Handbook number 22. In addition to the four fraternal yews of Borodale, the poem features a solitary yew, pride of Lawton Vale near Cockermouth, Wordsworth's birthplace. The poet imagines how in old days the Lawton yew provided archers with bows and sailors with ships, and how the capacious umbrage formed by the Borodale yews strangely resembles a place of worship. The poem evokes deep affinities between trees and humans, arousing in consequence a sense of empathetic feeling. The poem was divided into two and reprinted in popular 19th century guidebooks, including the later editions of Wordsworth's Guide, and thus contributed to making these yew trees popular forest attractions. This seems an important step for their protection. In the guide, Wordsworth laments the lack of magnificent trees in the Lake District and warns that unless greater care be taken of those that survive, these will be scarcely any ancient trees left. Contrastingly, this poem imagine that these trees, because of their slow growth, longevity, and massiveness, will never decay or be destroyed. Here, human care can be added as another element that protects them from destruction. Indeed, consecrated by Wordsworth's poem, which was repeatedly reproduced in guidebooks, these magnificent trees have continued to arouse admiration and affection in people's minds. Hence, they have been protected to this day. In conclusion, today I talked about Wordsworth's Guide to the Lakes, which is a first guidebook and also a book of guidance about how we should relate to landscape and environment. I tried to show how in this book Wordsworth poetically explains the concept of economy of nature by beautifully describing the network of water that circulates through the sky and land, the congenial relationship between trees and stone cottages, and the harmonious collaborations between human activities and processes of nature. I also suggested how his poem on ancient yew trees, by being reprinted in numerous guidebooks, contributed to their protection. Through his prose and verse, Wordsworth has done much to foster modern feelings of admiration and care for ancient trees. Poetry cannot rescue our environment directly, but by influencing our way of seeing and thinking about the world, I believe literature can make some contribution to the protection of our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that wonderful, informative, and very aesthetic talk, Professor Yoshikawa. I think perhaps one or two people might be leaving a little earlier. So if any of those have a question, they might want to think of asking quite soon. Just raise your hand and somehow let me know if you have a comment or question. Please. Karen Sensei. Now, Dr. Karen is our resident architect. Okay, so I thought you might have something to say here about human habitation and organic forms. So please.
It's not a question, but I'm really appreciate the talk because let's say maybe I know some of the background history when study about landscape appeared in architecture, maybe in the 18th centuries, and how this was important for people to think about that relationship with the nature. But this was always an act of human to try to control it and bring it back like that. I don't remember much about that. That's paragraph about the large tree, or how they trying with gardening in France to grow it in a really control and spotting way rather than leaving the nature and take this whole step. So I'm really I feel some of the things that remind me when we study Europe about this landscaping. And now we also try to go back with that idea how we can harmonize the life of living in nature. And it's still really a struggle kind of concept, because people has been growing with the modernized and think that that should be the rule. And we say that like it's really refreshing to hear this kind of talk, because it's all the things that my researcher writing paper, starting with some inspiration, the backgrounds, and then end up with the same kind of talk. So maybe for scientists, engineer, community like us would be much better to listen to some poets talk just a few times, and then we recognize a few concepts. That's the same voice. Yeah, not really a question.
Yeah, well, so thank you very much. And this picture shows what is that cottage, today's image, and it's still we can see a kind of some harmony between some plants and some cottage.
For those who didn't know much about this is where
Wordsworth lived in
his actual house.
Late 18th century and early 19th century. And, inside of the house is much more modernized and very comfortable, but still outside is try to keep the harmony between the nature and the building. So I'm always impressed by the way that they try to keep the buildings in harmony with nature. Yeah.
And if like with the talk, you can recognize like a lot of like timely observation to see how slow the nature is sinking into the habitat. So all of these like reflect really well. Really just worded.
This kind of company, vegetable garden houses can be possible because these houses were built by stones. In Japan, most houses are built by wood, so we cannot do this. Because wood house would be decaying.
Perhaps ivy can climb up wooden houses and
vegetation
a bit not really
difficult.
Destroy the I have a really bad.
Ivy's not good for wooden structures.
Have really bad.
No, so
all vegetation. It's not good for.
Yeah. So
this is really good with like planting garden, but then you have to redo that every year.
Yeah,
and it's not supposed to.
But here, well, we can complain about the wet weather in the Lake District, always raining. Yesterday's weather is just like English Lake District weather. That kind of things that continue almost the half of the year or something like that. So they can complain about it, but still, because of that wet weather, they can enjoy this kind of happiness relationship between cottage and trees. That's one of the things.
There's a difference with a bit of a similarity in traditional Japanese building, especially things like temples and shrines, especially Buddhist temples that are designed to decompose gracefully. I mean, Wordsworth loved, I wrote down this phrase, that graceful irregularity, you know. So I imagine he would have had positive things to say about the purposeful decomposing, because it removes right angles and it removes the perfectly straight lines, and it adds the irregularity, which he found. And I think he found it not just organic and natural, but also reflecting of some kind of human value too.
Yes, yeah. So, well, if I will just come here, he would be very pleased to observing all those irregular buildings. So, yes, graceful buildings.
I've got just a bunch of comments. I see if I can string a couple of them together there. When you're talking about the abode and these human habitations do not surpass the rudest habitations, and they're very organic, you know, and the cottages seem to have grown from the earth. How gorgeous, you know. It reminded me of something a little bit later, things like J.R.R. Tolkien and his hobbits dwellings, which are built as mounds in the earth, which of course also then links both of them to the modern idea, which is in a sense going back to some of these romantic ideas of the green roof. You know, in some big cities, including in Japan, you have tall buildings and maybe a whole side has some kind of vegetation growing on it, and that's a way of kind of uniting the human economy of profit and money with the economy of nature, because it has that beautiful way of making the regular forms irregular and organic, but it also makes it cheaper to cool the building with that. And I just wanted to sort of link that with the idea of you know, in this Living Ideas group, we try sometimes to connect to social development goals in the modern time. So even if we're looking at, you know, older works and pieces of literature and that sort of thing, we try to see what lessons it can give us for our SDG conscious age. And one thing that was very prominent in your wonderful talk was how aesthetic it was, and how the nature of what what Wordsworth was writing was highly, highly aesthetic.
Yes.
And fitting that into social development goals is not always so easy. So we can talk about, and then again, we have this link of this wonderful use of his phrase of the economy of nature is actually a very nice middle term between ecology and the actual way that we use the word economy now in terms of money and profit and saving money, etc. And aesthetics, you know, organic concerns, you can save money and increase profit with organic concerns, like the green roof can actually save money and look nice. But aesthetics itself tends to be, as people like Kant and other aestheticians have said, it tends to be disinterested. If you can make money from it, it's not really so aesthetic. The whole point is the sheer, pure beauty, and there's a kind of purity of that, which is disconnected from the economy as we know it in modern terms. And I'm just wondering what your reflections are, or if you have any Wordsworthian reflections on you see, I think most of Wordsworth's criticisms were not so much about how this is exactly directly destroying the ecology, although he was concerned, and certainly not so much concerned with the money side of economy, but rather just the aesthetics of it and how that affects the human soul, you know. And how do we, I mean, do you think we need a new SDG, an 18th one about aesthetics, or what? Or how can we fit it in?
Well, actually, Wordsworth was very concerned with economy too. He said that if he plants large trees in some rich soil, the large trees grow very fast. But the fast-growing trees is a profitless because it can easily catch sickness or the insect. So fast-growing
trees tend to be unhealthy.
Can be healthy. So it's not profitless at all. So was always trying to persuade those landowners, to think about the real economy. I mean, he never tried to sacrifice the economy.
Right.
So
he's actually using economic arguments
yes.
to kind of oppose people who are mainly economically concerned. So that it was really funny, by the way, that quotation about the larches. And at first I was thinking, that's very personal. What's his problem with the larch tree, the poor? What's it ever done to him? But actually, it's not the larch tree he's concerned about. His negativity is the disharmonious placement. They're fine in their right place. But when you, just plant huge, massive hectares of them, in order because they grow quickly and they give you cheaper firewood. That reminded me of Japan just after the end of in the several years after the end of the Second World War. And the Japanese government and industries thought we need more wood to rebuild after all of the devastation in Tokyo, Osaka, and so on. And so we build sugi trees. But then to this day now, everybody has atopy and asthma and skin problems because they didn't think properly. They built too much and it grew too quick. Maybe the sugi is like the Japanese version of the larch.
Well, in
the camphor tree, I think, is the English
in England too. After the First World War, they have a shortage of timber, so the government tried to make a large tree manufactory in the Lake District.
And was that larches again? Do you know, or not sure?
They say just conifers, but including larches, but yes, conifers. There was a big opposing campaign. They also tried to use Wordsworth as words to try to.
Was it done kind of too geometrically with all these right angles and? And when they cut them down, they just cut them down in straight lines. Yeah, and that goes back to the sort of question I was saying. How do you insert respect for aesthetics into the modern idea of social development goals? That's something that really needs thinking about, because there could be very good reasons for growing certain kinds of trees. They're fast growing. That they're not against the environment. They're not working against the environment. But there's one problem with them. They're just a little bit ugly and they're displeasing.
But recently they try to plant different kinds of trees, and not the monoculture, but try to diverse trees at once. But one forestry people.
Foresters, Forestry Commission.
Said that the large woods is good for squirrel. They can give a habitation.
Research squirrels.
So not totally bad about
right. And I suppose this is about encouraging the native British red squirrel.
Yeah, red squirrel.
Rather than the invasive grey, yes.
But probably we should try to mix several kinds of trees and not that one kind of monoculture.
I'd like to see if it's possible to open the discussion up to people in Zoom. Does anybody want to raise a hand? We have an Ayumi Matsuda. Do you want to turn up your volume?
Yeah.
So we can hear the question. Oh dear. That's a pity. Sorry about that. Well.
Maybe she will come back up.
Maybe she'll come back. Is there anybody else out there in Zoom who'd like to have a comment or question?
So just you and this.
Ah,
So we can invite
yes.
question for that.
Yes.
So,
Sorry?
Tim, I have, so if I understand correctly, so this was really a guide and a poem. So this first was a book about the lakes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really like a guidebook,
Yes.
which is
Prose.
written in a poem,
Pro, mainly prose.
mainly prose. Okay,
Mainly.
okay,
Oh, there's some excerpts
So-
of poetry, but
Some extracts of poetry,
So
but
this
mainly.
sort of style was like common and frequent during the 1800s. Okay, and how is it today? You know, when we can.
and even was there a guidebook? How many guidebooks were there before he wrote that guidebook? Not to the lakes, but to places in Europe or. It's well before.
There were many. I mean, well, I didn't research other areas, but to the English Lake District, there were quite many.
Quite a few already.
Yeah, already.
Yeah, I understand. So people was interested in what's the word, other places, and so they bought a guidebook and read about it and see some illustrations and something. So this was like pretty common stuff. And how this sort of, I don't know, literature or publication or something today, is there similar things today? You know, when people can freely travel cheap in anywhere, when you have, you know, without television, you can just look up in Google Lake District. I could, you know, find the house on Google Maps, and you know, I can rotate the camera around. So in modern times, in the current times, are these sort of
You mean like Lonely Planet and Rough Guide?
But it's not poem and not poetry. There's just
but this is not poetry either. It's not. I would say that this is a literary guide because it's written by a great writer. It's not a poem. It's not a great tract of poetry. It's a prose guidebook, and it's somewhat practical, but it's also beautiful.
Like, natural writing, nature writing.
Nature writing.
The kind of nature writing, maybe. So now the nature writing is a very popular genre in England. So there are big corners in the bookstore. There are big corners of nature writing.
People write books. What is it? People like Rebecca Solnit, walking. Some people write about nature, swimming, going to a certain place, and but they write it in a very beautiful literary way, meditative and such.
That's very interesting because, like, I would look really 5 pictures instead of reading 500 pages. So, really, but okay, I understand.
I mean, people would go, they'd visit a place while they're there, instead of watching TV, that they would read 20 pages that are quite thoughtfully written.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe prose are easier for many people to follow than his poetry. So in a way, his prose can easy access for the general readers.
Even your notes are full of English words I've never heard before. Your household fir. So fir is a tree like pine.
Yes.
And Yon is a name of someone. It's like the family name. So Yon's house.
No, Yon means something like that.
Yon means
it's
a bit old, So, it's
a challenge.
There are, of course, for the 21st century readers, maybe a bit challenging, but for the 19th century people,
By the way, do firs and yews, how common are they in Japan? Especially yews, those great, huge, gorgeous yews. Do we get them in Japan? Does anybody know?
Yes, it is called ichi. But ichi is tea. The first place. So this is a very,
So it means original or something like that? Foundation?
What do you mean?
First place. I'm just...
First place. So there are top trees in Japanese tree.
The number one.
Number one tree.
Like if there was a gold and a silver and a bronze for trees, this would be the gold.
And they use this to make the bow at
Bow. Kyudo?
Bow.
Kyudo is from the ichi.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe.
And did you say that's the same thing in England too? In England too, they made bows from.
In England, they were planted in the graveyard. But we have no connection with the graveyard.
Right.
Trees,
but it does have many connections because it has the top place among trees. And yes. Another comment, just in passing, was the is it the suki tree that what is the tree where in Japan often you get Shinto shrines are built around a huge tree?
I think sugi.
Is that sugi?
Yeah.
And that his sense of an almost holiness, but an organic, so you call it natural piety or something for Wordsworth, but his sense of that in the as a kind of natural holiness. I think that relates probably very favorably to the Japanese sense of building a shrine. True. Where do we build it? Find the best sugi tree in the area, and the biggest and the strongest and the most sheltering. And the kind of words that Wordsworth was using, I think, are very resonant with that tradition in Japan too. I mean, there are probably other cultures with similar sorts of reverence for big old trees.
Well, what is interesting about Japanese shrines, and they rebuild the shrine every 60 years or something like that. They also have some kind of idea that the regeneration, or something like that.
It's very different. It's very different from British ideas and European ideas. When I first came to Japan and I went to a castle, I was just saying to people, can you show me a castle that is real? Where the stones are the stones that somebody laid 600 years ago or something. And I think Matsue is one of them. I think there's maybe one more. There are two castles where the stones go back. But the idea, but then that's a strange kind of European prejudice where a building is just the age of the stones. Well, actually, if you keep pretty much exactly the same form, the idea of the building, the architecture of the building is what is sort of what remains there.
First of all, I would like to say that it was very, very interesting and very beautiful the way you presented it. The tone of your speech, it was very beautiful. And for me, Wordsworth was a poet. I had no idea. I didn't know that he wrote so many things like this. So I'm a geologist. So when I go outside, probably mostly I see just rocks. And for me, whatever is on top of it is the result of whatever the kind of rocks that are underneath. For example, the harmony and the different shapes of other. Those are, for me, when I went to field work, I found a particular kind of tree. Everywhere that there was a particular kind of rock that I was studying. And I study rocks that are, billions of years old. And this was completely different perspective for me. And when I say I am in nature, of course, I see there are trees around, but I mostly see rocks. So here, I think even when you said the Japan seaside, the beach, I see the rocks that are exposed. So this was really fresh.
But actually, but this time my talk was focused on trees, but was also interested in rocks and have kind of geological ideas. And actually, not only Wordsworth, but this age, I mean, the early 19th century, people are more and more interested in geology of the Lake District. So many of the guidebooks include some pages about geology in the Lake District, and then they just began to find that the geology of the Lake District is continuous to the Yorkshire area. So that they discover some caves or some underworld things. So Wordsworth also wrote about some caves, Yoda's caves or something like that. And so maybe I need to make another talk about.
In this very talk, you brought in how the graceful irregularity that Wordsworth thinks is so important to the human soul and to the economy of nature, how that, when humans do start to change the landscape, they do it best, not by those uniform straight line regularities that you see in Italy and Greece and so on, with the olive plantations all in straight lines. But actually, that's pretty much any farm in the modern world. But you see it where actual plows had to change their course because of the different kind of soil and rock. And the dry stone walls would change their course because of the contours of the land. And again, sometimes even the kind of rock that it's, you know, foundational there. So it's a kind of a heartfelt, soul-felt plea to feel the contours of the rocks and the soil in order to make your changes, and listen to the land in its foundation, and not just to impose your human right angles, etc. There. And I think that applies massively to modern concerns about social development, because when you hear public outcries against some kind of environmental scheme, it's often, for example, with the windmills, people just say how ugly it is. Straight lines and straight lines and straight lines and straight lines, and rows and rows and rows of these straight windmills with their straight lines moving around. And it's not graceful irregularity, it's a kind of imposition by humans. And, you know, we see the sustainable development side of that, but it's not aesthetically, and it's not harmonious of, you know, man and nature, as you put it there. And it does seem, I think, that we do need, with social development goals, we do need to listen to the ideas of the harmony of nature, the harmony of living with nature, and the aesthetics change our kind of level of happiness and well-being, probably. And just knowing where the rocks are and what kinds there are, and then being respectful of that, will mean that we have irregular patterns everywhere and not just grid lines. You know?
Yeah, and Wordsworth talk about the color of architecture. So when he talked about architecture, about vernacular architecture, he observes the color of stones in each part of the veil. So some part of a bit red stone and some part of blue stone, and so that he talks about the colors of stone, the rich
Another comment that's perhaps just a little bit sad, and it's just a mark of how times have changed, is, you know, you're talking about the humbleness of the lake cottage, you know, and you know, he says some comment that it's, you know, it's scarcely a great improvement or something like that over the rudest kind of habitation, you know, the most basic. You know, it's not that much more advanced than a cave or something, he seems to be saying. And yet, actually, of course, not just a Lakeland cottage, but any kind of rural cottage, you're probably going to be paying millions of pounds for one today. It's actually, people appreciate the aesthetics of it and the beauty of it and the greatness of it.
Yes, the irony is that, and now in the Lake District, they kind of built some big tall buildings. So because
it's against the local regulations of they do respect the aesthetics.
Yeah, they still live in the very old style of buildings, but because of that, there are few during places for general people, and because many people like to buy houses there, the price of the houses are very rising up, so the local people cannot afford to live there. So just rich people come here and try to live there. So that's very ironic. Yeah. So maybe we allow them to build up some tall apartment or something. They can afford some affordable houses for many young people, but they cannot do that. So it's a dilemma between the human economy and economy of nature.
It seems in a way that the 19th century and possibly the early 20th century was a kind of golden age of ordinary people's house building. Because they were just aesthetically pleasing and sort of humanly formed. You know, different aestheticians have talked about, you know, just the balance of the door frame and the windows, and it just fits humans. Whereas the way buildings are designed nowadays, it just seems quite alien and cold and not welcoming. And it doesn't seem to be, because it's not an economic concern, the voice of aesthetics, and I'm using that word aesthetics a lot because your paper was highly aesthetic, you know, and you pick up on Wordsworth's aesthetic concerns, but the voice of aesthetics has just kind of become drowned out, even by ecological concerns. So, not just by profit and capitalism and that sort of thing, but even ecological concern. But if we don't have that balance of, you know, the human heart and the harmony of nature, then we're losing something very important and subtle, but important.
So, yeah, quite difficult to manage.
Any further comments or reflections? Kobayashi Sensei, she's from linguistics here.
Thank you very much.
And it reminded me of Walden. I learned Thoreau's Walden when I was an undergraduate. I believe that Walden was written with the same appearance, with 18th century. Is there any reason why people like such nature writing and starting to appreciate nature? Is there any reason? Again,
Great question.
Two big questions.
Great question.
But yeah, so Thoreau didn't Wordsworth's house, but Thoreau's Emerson did Wordsworth.
Thoreau actually lived on Emerson's land for that book.
So I'm sure that Wordsworth influenced both Emerson and Thoreau.
Emerson met.
Emerson. Wordsworth met Wordsworth, and he didn't like Wordsworth. Wordsworth a bit selfish, and he talked only about his poems, etc. Well, in any case, in the 19th century, probably the start, because of the start of the industrialization, and urbanization, so people began to be more concerned about living in harmony with nature. So that's why people began to be interested in nature writing. And in the 19th century, now we have some regulation about the smoke or etc. But in those days, they had no regulation about some pollution, air pollution or water pollution at all. So that they lived in much worse.
In that respect, cities are better today.
For example, in Manchester or Liverpool, in those places, people lived in much worse conditions. So they began to think that at least there should be some places protected for those town people, so that they could come there for the weekend to have some rest there, to come back to their dirty area to work again or something like that. So I think that the concern for nature preservation is go with urbanization or industrialization.
We need it then, yeah. When people are living in harmony with nature in the agrarian or agricultural lifestyle, we don't need all this urban regulation. Now that things are going to a mess, then we need it too. So I think there's also the sense of, as you touched on, you know, these people with Thoreau and Wordsworth, there were actual physical connections between these human beings. There's a kind of line of succession. So Emerson, you know, after his wife died, felt so depressed. He gave up his religion in a way. He went to Europe to meet important people who had given him inspiration. He met Coleridge, he met Wordsworth, he met Carlyle, all of whom were nature writers in this romantic sense. And their big theme was the connection of the human heart with the energy and power of nature. That was their big, huge romantic theme. He took it back to America, Emerson, and his people like Thoreau, who was his sort of protege, and they encouraged another Scottish man who moved over as a child to America, John Muir. And really interesting story here is that Wordsworth and his Guide to the Lakes and all of his and his poetry raised and elevated human consciousness in Britain of the Lake District and the beauty of nature, rather than it just being something inconvenient and far from London. It was a treasure. And Muir, who met Emerson, and who also met President Theodore Roosevelt, and he lived he was a wild man, almost like a bear. He lived in the woods, and he camped for years and years and years, for decades. And he had a wife and children, actually, but he didn't meet them much because he was living with the bears in Yosemite Park. And he said to the president, you know, and to Emerson as well, we have to preserve these, forget the churches, forget the cathedrals. These are our cathedrals. The spiritual life, the Romantics were thinking, is in nature. That is at the source of our spiritual feeling. And from that, in England with people like Wordsworth, and in America with people like John Muir, coming from Emerson and Thoreau, we got the invention of, not just tourism, but the invention of the national park. So we have, you mentioned the National Trust. Yes. Here, you know, and you quoted from that. And things like the National Park. People like Wordsworth, they use his name in the National Trust all the time. You look at their website and search for Wordsworth, you'll get lots of hits. And the same thing in America. And then Japan has its national parks. And all of this is kind of coming from Wordsworth and Emerson and Thoreau and Muir, isn't it?
Yes, it seems interesting that Walter's idea of Lake District as a national property influenced the idea of national park in the US. And then that idea came back to England to produce a national trust. Yeah, so there are some interaction between...
and not much was lost along the way, thankfully. The idea is preserved. Circulated. And then it spreads around the world.
But in England, the first national park was made after the Second World War, so much later than the US. I think in the US there are much wider place. It's still not owned by people, but in England, every land was already owned by someone. So it was very difficult to make national park.
Yes, so, because law is basically 9/10 property. But this brings us to a couple of interesting controversies. And I wonder, did Wordsworth mention this? The British landscape, especially the English, even more than the Scottish, but the Scottish too, the British landscape is shaped by, this comes into geology too, the British landscape, often beloved for kind of wildernesses. So Northumbria, on the other side of the country, Northumbria is as north as the Lake District, but it's on the east, not the west. Northumbria is famous, but it's the largest wilderness in Europe, apparently. It's an actual wilderness, because it's so untouched by humans. And yet it's mainly just grassland and almost barren. There's rocks everywhere, you'd love it. And not that many forests and trees. But why is that? It was shaped by the British Navy. Britain needed so many ships, they just cut down huge areas of trees. Britain gained its industrial prominence, etc., and maritime, sea prominence from this. And I wonder if, so people romanticize the bare and barren rocks and so on of the British landscape often. Did Wordsworth talk about that, or is that my point is it's artificial. The barrenness of the British landscape is artificial. It's created by cutting down trees to make ships.
True,
And so it's beautiful, but also, wouldn't it be more beautiful if it were, Britain should be naturally, without men, a forest. It should be deeply, highly forested with bears and wolves, etc. What we see today is gorgeous in its own way, but it's naked without what you talk about, the trees.
Yeah, he made a brief mention that England was all covered by trees.
Is that in the Guide to the Lakes? Or?
Yeah, here. But just that. But he didn't mention what you said about this barrenness is artificial or something.
And it's
he didn't.
There's a sort of politics of civilization point there, and there's also the aesthetic point. I suppose because it didn't happen all at once, and the wind was allowed to change the landscape. Then there's a beauty that arises. And then the sort of secondary point that it comes to is, Britain used to be also quite filled with bears and wolves and beavers, some of these animals which were destroyed by hunting for money or
Yeah.
for sport, or because people were frightened of them.
Mm.
But nowadays we have the modern wilding movement. You must have heard about that.
Mm.
I wonder if Wordsworth said anything about, you know, the loss of these wilders.
Yes, he mentioned about some big, deer, red deer, yeah,
Right.
or some boar.
Mm.
But actually, Grasmere is where Wordsworth lived. Grasmere, the grass means comes from some boar, so the boar land, the wild pig.
And did he regret the extinction, not the removal of these animals? He just mentioned it as a fact.
Mentioned it.
Yes, yes, but we have more of a sort of a consciousness of that these days. Okay, well, thank you very much. Maybe we can, you know, wind things down a little bit, but I think maybe it might be a good time to stop the recording if I can work out how to do that. And we have something to eat. Everyone, thank you for coming. So we got some scones like last time, and Farron caught some food.